hearing for the nomination of Amtrak board members. Before we begin, though, I want to acknowledge the solemn anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Yesterday, President Biden issued a White House proclamation declaring September 11, 2024 as Patriot Day and National Day of Service and Remembrance. On this day, we remember the innocent victims our nation lost now 23 years ago. The Commerce Committee is here to meet to consider 4 of the President's nominees for Amtrak's Board of Directors. Amtrak is in the midst of one of the most significant transformations since it was founded over 50 years ago, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. While President Biden may be the company's most high-profile supporter, I want to acknowledge members on both sides of the aisle here who continue to work on supporting Amtrak, holding the company accountable, and ensuring our constituents get the services they deserve. The company is working to improve and grow its services. This year, ridership is on track to exceed pre-COVID levels, and so far this year, it has returned the Northeast Corridor to operating in the black, making more in ticket sales than it costs to operate, and the company's service options are also growing. At the end of last year, the Amtrak added 2 round trips to the Cascade service between Seattle and Portland. In May, the Amtrak Borealis, a new state-supported route, began service between Chicago and St. Paul. And just last week, DOT announced Amtrak would receive a $64 million fund to advance high-speed rail projects between Dallas and Houston. That is just one of the 69 new passenger rail corridors in 44 states that the Federal Railroad Administration is working to develop in coordination with Amtrak. But despite these successes, challenges remain. In the wake of the DuPont derailment in the state of Washington, I've worked to require FAA to conduct an in-depth safety assessment of Amtrak. In 2022, FRA found 30 areas where Amtrak could improve, and while Amtrak has worked to complete 13 of those recommendations, more work needs to be done. The company also needs to significantly quicken its pace to become compliant with the American with Disabilities Act, as documented by the Amtrak Inspector General report. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Duckworth, for her work on that issue. This is the role of the Amtrak board, to ensure that Amtrak is meeting the needs of Americans' transportation system and using taxpayer dollars wisely. Whether it is wise and effective infrastructure investment and ensuring that safety remains the top priority, it is the job of these board members to make sure these issues are addressed. I especially want to thank my colleague, Senator Tester, for leading the fight to ensure that the Biden administration nominated individuals from the West. Thanks to his efforts, the nominees here today and the most recent nominee announced this week bring a board geographic representation that is much needed. Shortly, we will hear from the 4 president's nominees from the Amtrak Board of Directors. David Shaposi of Maryland, am I saying that right? Shaposi? Who has dedicated his career to advocating for people with disabilities, including veterans. And as I mentioned, Senator Duckworth fought so hard on this in the infrastructure bill. Samuel Latham of Delaware, who is a local labor leader and has extensive experience serving on public boards. Thank you. And Ron Batori, is that right, Mr. Batori? Of Santa Fe, New Mexico, who has had a long career in private rail industry, including serving as the head of the FRA administration under President Trump, and Elaine Clegg, who is from Boise, Idaho, who spent over 20 years of public service in local government, including current role as executive director of the Valley Regional Transit, which serves 650,000 people. So I look forward to hearing from all of you and your priorities, should you be confirmed, on ways to improve Amtrak and hold the agency organization accountable. I now want to turn to Ranking Member Schmidt, who's filling in today for Senator Cruz. Thank you, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. I want to thank the nominees for being here today. We're here to consider 4 nominees to Amtrak's Board of Directors. I'm particularly grateful to Mr. Batori for his willingness to be a member of the Amtrak Board. With over 45 years of experience in the railroad industry, he would be a very valuable addition to the board. Mr. Batori was the administrator of the Federal Railway Administration during the final push to implement the railroad safety system known as Positive Train Control, or PTC, which can help prevent a derailment or other incidents from overspeed. When Mr. Vittori came to FRA in 2018, only 1/4 of passenger rail route miles had fully implemented PTC. By the time he left the agency, Mr. Vittori had gotten PTC compliance to 100%. He held hundreds of meetings with railroads and suppliers to make sure that every railroad met the deadline by the end of 2020. Mr. Vittori is a proven leader who bring a deep knowledge of railroading to the Amtrak Board. I'll turn briefly to 3 issues that Republicans have raised previously. First, the Republican board must fairly represent the interests of all Americans. Federal law allows no more than 4 of the board's 8 members to be from states along the Northeast corridor. Last year, several Republican committee members noted that the Biden-Harris administration had nominated too few Amtrak board nominees from the Northeast, or too many, I should say, from the Northeast. The White House finally publicly committed to correcting this illegal and improper geographic imbalance. While I think there's more work to be done to include representation from areas such as the Midwest, where I hail from, I know several members of this committee are glad the White House has paid more attention to the law this time around. Second, the Amtrak board must be more transparent and reasonable in its award of bonuses. Amtrak paid $75 million in bonuses last fiscal year, when the company received over $11 billion in federal funding awards and posted a net loss of $1.75 billion. After learning of this, Senators Fisher and Cruz wrote to Chairman Kosha to demand more accountability. Americans back home may find it shocking to know that 14 Amtrak executives got bonuses in excess of $200,000 after nearly a $2 billion loss. Amtrak promptly committed to publicly posting bonuses following this letter, but the government's passenger railroad must achieve better financial metrics and make more responsible use of taxpayer subsidies. I hope each of the nominees here today are willing to closely scrutinize future bonuses, particularly large sums for senior executives when Amtrak's financial performance has been poor. The third issue I want to raise to discuss is the spectacularly expensive Gateway program between Newark and New York City that Amtrak is involved in. Gateway includes the Hudson Tunnel project, which has now been awarded federal funding to cover roughly 3/4 of its staggering cost of more than $15 billion. The Gateway program cannot continue to balloon in cost. The $37 billion estimated total must not become $50 billion or $60 billion. Having an Amtrak board of directors that provides effective oversight and demands accountability is more important than ever. I'm eager to hear about the qualifications and vision that Mr. Vittori, Mr. Capozzi, all right, thank you, sorry, Ms. Clegg and Mr. Latham have for responsibly managing our country's national passenger railroad. Amtrak faces many difficult challenges ahead, including some of which I just described, and it's going to take skilled, experienced leadership on the board to address those challenges. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Mr. Capozzi, we'll start with you. Again, thank you to all the nominees for your willingness to serve.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cantwell, Senator Schmidt. I'm honored to be here today as a nominee for Amtrak's Board of Directors. I'm joined here with my wife, Patty, and last month we celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, so congratulations to Patty. If confirmed, I'll be the first person to fulfill the requirement in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that Amtrak's board include at least one person with a disability who has a demonstrated history of or experience with accessibility in passenger rail. I'm the right person for that job. For over 35 years, I've worked to make transportation more accessible for people with disabilities. I was a member of the legal team for the disability community that helped craft the Americans with Disabilities Act. I testified in support of its passage before a House committee, and following the ADA's enactment, I chaired the Department of Transportation's advisory committee that provided recommendations for DOT's proposed ADA regulations. From 2008 until I retired from the federal government in 2020, I served as executive director of the U.S. Access Board, the federal agency whose mission is accessibility for people with disabilities. There, I led the development of guidelines and standards to implement the ADA and other federal laws relating to accessibility. This included updating the requirements that apply to rapid, light, commuter, intercity, and high-speed rail systems. I'll bring my many years of experience to the Amtrak Board, both in federal government service and with nonprofit organizations in addressing rail and other public transportation accessibility issues. I'll also bring my commitment to ensure that Amtrak makes accessibility one of its highest priorities. Now, thanks to the administration and Congress, there are unprecedented levels of funding for Amtrak, providing the opportunity to advance the vision of an expanded, improved, and accessible intercity passenger rail network. I'm particularly excited to be nominated to Amtrak's board at this time and to support Amtrak's efforts to fulfill its ADA obligations. But today, only about a third of the nearly 400 stations for which Amtrak has or shares ADA responsibility meet the law's requirements. As part of a 2020 settlement with the Department of Justice, Amtrak made commitments to bring these stations into compliance with the law. As a member of Amtrak's board, one of my areas of focus will be in providing leadership and attention in fulfilling Amtrak's obligations under the ADA and the DOJ settlement agreement. Of particular importance is ensuring that the new long-distance equipment Amtrak plans to order within the next year meets or exceeds the ADA's requirements. Since passenger rail cars often have a service life of 40 years or more and cannot be easily modified, it's important that the new equipment be designed and manufactured to optimize accessibility. I intend to work to ensure that happens. As an advocate for the disability community and later in my federal government service, I've spent my career helping to develop the accessibility laws, regulations, and guidelines that apply to Amtrak. Serving on its board will enable me to oversee the implementation of those policies and to help ensure that people with disabilities can travel without obstacles wherever they want to go by Amtrak. Thank you for your consideration of my nomination, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And if confirmed, I look forward to working cooperatively with the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Capozzi, and thank you for that very important work on Americans with disabilities. Mr. Latham, welcome. We look forward to your testimony.
Good morning. This is the day that the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Chair Cantwell, Senator Smith, other members of the committee, my name is Samuel E. Latham, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I began working at the Chrysler plant in Newark, Delaware in 1965 and retired from it 39 years later. I served in numerous union leadership positions as a member of the United Auto Workers and as president of the Delaware State AFL-CIO. I also served as a administrator of the UAW Chrysler Training Center at the Newark plant. I have decades of experience as a board member of government-created entities. Since 2001, I have been a commissioner with the Delaware River Bay Authority, or the DRBA, which operates the Delaware Memorial Bridge, 3 airports, and the Cape May Lewis Ferry, which is a great ride if you get an opportunity. I currently serve as DRBA's chair. I'm also a former board member of the Diamond State Port Corporation, which operates the Port of Wilmington. Like Amtrak, DRBA and Diamond State have a public mission, but earn much of their revenue from providing transportation-related services to customers. The Cape May Lewis Ferry carries about 700,000 passengers a year and is an essential service for many of its passengers. My experience with public transportation through the ferry is one of the reasons I'm interested in serving on the Amtrak's board. I've also served on the boards of many charitable and educational labor and citizen organizations, including Junior Achievement, the Metropolitan and Wilmington Urban League, the United Way of Delaware, the 4-H Foundation Committee. I formerly chaired the Delaware Advisory Council on Career and Vocational Education. Also served as an associate minister at Cornerstone Fellowship Baptist Church in Wilmington. Before going to work in the auto industry, I served in the Army from 1963 to 1965 at Fort Hood in Texas, 1st Armored Division. I received the Delaware Distinguished Medal from the State of Delaware Department of Military Affairs Office of the Adjutant General. I know firsthand how important Amtrak is to travelers, businesses, and to the communities it serves in which its employees work and live. I spent my working career in an automobile plant located next to and served by freight trains operated over Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. I live in Bear, Delaware, where one of Amtrak's 3 major equipment maintenance facilities is located. As a lifelong resident of Delaware, a predominantly rural state outside of the Wilmington area, who has been involved with and led statewide organizations. I appreciate the importance of Amtrak and other public transportation services to rural communities. I have worked on both sides of the labor management issues as a union official and a board member of organizations with agreement-covered workforces. I know how to work with people with different views and perspectives and the importance of seeking a compromise that produces a win-win for both sides. I believe my experience in vocational education and training will be particularly useful at a time when Amtrak has been hiring large numbers of new workers to work out major construction projects funded by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I recognize how important it is for Amtrak to work with labor unions to provide good jobs, working conditions, and training for both its experienced and new employees. Thank you for your time, and I confirm look forward to serving on Amtrak's board.
Thank you, Mr. Latham, and thank you for your service to the country. Mr. Batory, welcome. Look forward to your comments.
Good morning, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and distinguished members of the committee.
Mr. Batory, could you just pull the microphone a little closer to? Yeah, thank you.
Just a little better?
Yes.
There we go. Good morning. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning as a nominee for the Amtrak Board of Directors. I am a second-generation railroader. My father worked for the New York Central Railroad System, and later in his career was a full-time union official. After graduating from college in 1971, my first job was an hourly employee with the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad. I spent the next 46 years in a variety of railroad positions, nearly all of which were focused on operations. In 1994, I became president of the Belt Railway Company of Chicago, the largest switching and terminal railroad in the United States, whose services and facilities are used by all the Class I railroads serving Chicago. From 2004 until 2017, I served as president of Cantwell, a jointly owned subsidiary of Norfolk Southern Corporation and CSX. Cantwell provides local freight operations and switching on behalf of those 2 railroads in the Philadelphia area, northern New Jersey, including along the Amtrak's Northeast Corridor and in the Detroit, Michigan area. I was preparing to retire from the railroad industry to move to my current home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I decided to apply to be administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration. At that time, I assumed the position in February of 2018 following Senate confirmation. FRA and the railroad industry faced an enormous challenge. The final deadline for implementation of the statutory requirement to install positive train control, or PTC, on nearly 58,000 miles of track to reduce the risk of accidents was less than 3 years away, and it appeared that many railroads would miss the deadline. I took immediate action to ensure that that did not happen, including redeploying FRA staffing resources, providing additional technical assistance to railroads, and issuing public quarterly infographics tracking of each railroad's progress. I am gratified to report that as of December 29, 2020, 2 days before the statutory deadline, all 41 railroads responsible for implementing PTC was done so on every mile of track on which it was required. Among the other important FRA accomplishments during my tenure was the issuance of a final rule long delayed by litigation, followed by a previous FRA rulemaking that established metrics and minimum standards for all intercity passenger rail service. These metrics and standards are used to measure Amtrak's performance, including customer satisfaction, on-time performance, and the extent to which Amtrak is serving communities that are not well served or served at all by other public transportation modes, of which are long-distance routes. In addition to my railroad operations experience, one of the things I brought to the FRA role of, as administrator would bring the Amtrak Board in many decades of experience dealing with all railroad stakeholder groups, including freight, commuter railroads, rail labor, and federal, state, and local officials. I believe in maintaining respectful relationships, and I recognize that collaboration is essential in everything the railroad industry does. I consider myself to be a fact-based leader who is emphatic and willing to listen and learn from others. Safety has always been and will continue to be my highest priority. The opportunity to make railroads safer is one of the main reasons I sought the FRA administrator job. As an Amtrak board member, I would ensure the company's leadership is focused on safety and prioritizing it when allocating limited funding. I am very grateful for the opportunities the railroad industry has given me and to the many people I work with who taught me everything I know about railroading. I welcome the chance to continue to contribute to the industry. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I now look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Batory, and we will get to that in a minute, but we have one more nominee here. Ms. Clegg, thank you for your willingness to serve. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Schmidt, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. My name's Elaine Clegg, and I'm deeply honored to be nominated to join the Amtrak Board of Directors. I'm a resident of Boise, Idaho, and an Idaho native. I grew up loving train travel. Traveling by train to Boise every summer while my family lived in Denver. My mother's family moved to Idaho by train and even lived in a boxcar on a siding in a fledgling logging community. Idaho has been the fastest growing U.S. state for most of the past decade and is part of the Mountain West region, the fastest growing region in the country. The Mountain West has harsh winters, often closing roads, an aging population, and nearly 20 million people who experience lower levels of Amtrak and other public transportation services than found elsewhere in the country, despite very long travel distances. If confirmed, I will provide a Western point of view on our nation's railroad needs. My advocacy for better public transportation is accompanied by 20 years of experience overseeing public services for a city of over 230,000 residents as a member of the Boise City Council, where my primary focus was in land use and transportation planning and policy. I also chaired the National League of Cities Transportation and Infrastructure Services Committee and have served on numerous boards of city and professional organizations across the country. Before serving on the City Council, I spent 15 years running a small business, then working for a nonprofit organization, all while raising 5 children and finishing my college degree. Since February of last year, I have been the CEO of Valley Regional Transit, where I previously served as a board and executive board member and chair. Valley Regional Transit provides fixed route bus service throughout the Boise metropolitan region, serving over 1 million riders annually. We recently introduced a revised bus network that offers better service while improving cost efficiencies in our operations. The only Amtrak services in the Mountain West are 4 long-distance routes that skirt the edges of the region and operate once a day or less. There is no service at all in the heart of the inland Northwest. Boise has one of the most beautiful train stations in the country, but it has been without a passenger train since the Pioneer, a long-distance train from Seattle through Denver to Chicago, was discontinued in 1997. Today, Idaho's only Amtrak train is the Empire Builder, stopping at a single station in a remote panhandle community in the middle of the night. Idaho, like other mountain states, has little airline service outside the Boise region, with very little air service and very sparse intercity bus elsewhere. Those of us who live in the Mountain West and need passenger rail and other ways to travel. People move to our region for the lifestyle, yet because of the lack of transportation options, they are finding their new home means a lot of long-distance driving on difficult roads, even in bad weather. One of my long-standing goals has been to bring more Amtrak service back to the Northwest. I helped organize the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Working Group, whose vision is to develop a multimodal, connected transportation network anchored by passenger rail. We worked on the corridor identification program applications to the FRA, such as from Boise to Salt Lake City, and participated in the FRA long-distance service study required by the IAJA. I'm excited the former Pioneer route is one of the routes included in FRA's proposed long-distance expansion. I'm a problem solver who recognizes the importance of collaboration, creative ideas, planning, setting priorities, and managing lean budgets. I work by bringing those ideas and a fresh perspective and working transparently with the public and decision makers so all have a voice and ownership in the way forward. The United States was built on opportunity for all. We need more travel options, particularly for those who are aging, disabled, are unable to drive or fly, and especially in our small communities and rural areas. Without the train that brought my grandparents to Idaho, they would not have had the same opportunities. Without trains and other travel modes, many Americans today can't take advantage of the opportunities that would otherwise improve their lives. If confirmed, I will continue to work to bring passenger rail to the places that don't have service today and will provide a Western point of view on the Amtrak board. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Well, let's go to questions now. I know we have many members who have signed up, many of them remotely, but I'm sure they will be coming on the screen. And we will start with questions with myself and then Senator Schmidt and so forth. So I wanted to ask the nominees, you all mentioned safety, and thank you for that. According to the latest report I mentioned in my opening statement, there were 13 completed items, but there are 30 recommendations. So one, how will you drive Amtrak to complete those items of safety and operations? And number two, obviously very concerned about the Western Empire Builder and Coastal Starlight service that serves many communities. How will you each commit to protect the nation's long-distance service, particularly in the West? So Mr. Capozzi, and then just down the line, safety and service.
In terms of long-distance service, I'd have to say I value all types of train service that Amtrak offers, long-distance, state-supported, and the Northeast Corridor services. And I share your commitment to long-distance train service, and I would commit to that as a board member, equally as well as to security. Safety, security, and accessibility are kind of 3 legs to a stool, and I think they're all very important.
Mr. Latham?
Preventive maintenance is very important to me. I think if we did a lot more preventive maintenance, maybe we could handle some of the issues that come up. And long-distance transportation is definitely important, so I support you in that area.
Thank you. Mr. Batory?
Yes, Chair Cantwell. Safety never sleeps. Safety is the cornerstone of good business. Safety requires constant focus, and I've been committed to safety my entire railroad career, and it's unwavering. Insofar as the train network system of Amtrak, I am a proponent of the national network as related to long-distance trains, state-supported trains, the Northeast Corridor, insofar as how it connects and creates a national network.
Thank you. Ms. Clegg?
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. I have worked on safety my whole career. Before this job, I worked on bicycle and pedestrian safety and transit safety, bringing forward the process that helped develop the safe systems approach that the FHWA is now using for those modes of travel. Safety is always top of mind. While at the National League of Cities TIS committee, we worked with railroads and communities across the country to ensure that communication between the railroads and first responders was what it should be, so that if incidents did happen, those first responders could respond well, and we'll bring that experience. As you know, I'm from the West, and am very interested in expanding the long-distance network, as well as making sure that it ties in well to the Northeast Corridor so that we have a connected system. Helping people get from one place to the other means not just one city to the next city, but from wherever they are to wherever they want to travel. And to do that, we need a much better connected system of travel on the railroads in the United States. I'll work toward that.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your commitments. I'm definitely going to ask a few more detailed questions on safety for the record, but I want to get your thoughts about the Cascade services, because pre-pandemic, you know, we had a lot of issues. We were able to restore, you know, Seattle to Portland, but there was a lot of banging on the door. And so this issue of where states have big concerns, how does Amtrak communicate to them, and, you know, without having us be right in the middle of it? So right now, the Amtrak Cascades trains only arrive on time 64% of the time. So this is the third worst performing state supported in the nation, and it's really unacceptable. So what can you do to improve the performance of the Cascade route right down the line? Ms. Clegg, do you want to start this time?
Sure. You know, on-time performance is a long-standing issue. I don't have any magic. I'll add that in addition to living in the logging camp, my grandfather had to ride the logs down the river and deliver them to the mill. And when there was a log jam, he had to break it up. And he talked to me about how to do that. And he did it by looking at it from all perspectives, poking around, finding something that would move, seeing if he could get that move, and then the next thing, and the next thing. That's how I'll approach these issues at Amtrak. Poke around, ask a lot of questions, try to see what we can get moving.
Mr. Vittori, on-time service?
Yes, Chair Cantwell. As far as the Pacific Northwest is concerned, I was somewhat surprised by hearing your remark that it was in the mid-60s. There's obviously a major opportunity for improvement, but that responsibility towards improvement resides with Amtrak and the host railroads. And that's where it should be addressed, and that's where it needs to be resolved, not through third-party intervention.
Thank you. Mr. Latham?
I still think it still comes down to preventive maintenance, not just the rails, the locomotives themselves, the depots, to make sure that everything is operating the way it should be operating, especially the machinery, which is preventive maintenance.
Thank you. Mr. Capozzi?
I think it goes back to Amtrak's mission. And Amtrak's mission is to provide efficient and effective intercity passenger rail mobility consisting of high-quality service that is trip time competitive with other intercity travel options. And I think we need to be driven by the mission to ensure that we meet that, through all facets of Amtrak travel.
Thank you. Thank you all. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you. Mr. Latham, I do have a couple of questions for you. According to public reporting in 2009, you traveled with a 3-person delegation of union leaders to Venezuela to explore the possibility of trade or exchange directly between Venezuela and the port of Wilmington. You attended this trip, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The Venezuelan government funded the trip?
No.
Okay, in a previous interview, you said yes.
A government-funded trip?
Yeah, the Venezuelan government
Oh,
funded
yeah,
the
the
trip.
Venezuelan government, yes.
Yeah. Did you meet with Hugo Chavez while you were on the trip?
Yes.
Okay. Did you also attend a Chavez rally while you were there?
Yes.
Okay. You told the Delaware News Journal at the time that based on what they've done in this state, they've been very benevolent, referring to the Venezuelan regime, which had sent millions of gallons of free or discounted oil to Delaware in an effort to embarrass the Bush administration. Would you still characterize the Chavez regime as benevolent?
No, I've never said they were benevolent.
Okay. Well, we're happy to get you.
I didn't support the regime then, and I don't support it now. My understanding is that, I don't remember whether it was a Kennedy or not, he was getting oil from Venezuela and giving to people that didn't have the means to get oil.
Okay.
I had nothing to do with it. That's just my understanding of what the situation was.
And then the next year, well, in 2011, you went back, is that right?
Yes.
As part of a delegation of the African Socialist International?
Again, was invited, yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the political opinions of the ASI?
No.
Okay. Well, ASI explicitly said it went to Venezuela, the trip that you were on, to express our unity, quote, to express our unity and support for Comrade Hugo Chavez in his efforts to lead Venezuela in the nationalization of its resources and the resistance to U.S. imperialism's attempt to control those resources. You find that statement concerning?
Again, I went as a guest of the president of the Building Trades of Delaware.
Okay. Mr. Vittori, I do want to ask you, what, I've expressed some concerns about some geographic imbalance with the board and not adequately representing the Midwest. What perspective would you bring to make sure the interests of Missourians are considered on this board?
Senator, I'm quite familiar with the existing network as well as the legacy or history of that network. It has been rationalized, okay, over its 50 years plus of history. There's opportunity naturally because geographic populations have changed. We naturally have the service between Chicago and St. Louis and on into Kansas City with the nickname of the Mules.
The River Runner.
The Mules there between Kansas City and St. Louis. And there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, especially from St. Louis to Kansas City, insofar as hosting and train operations. There is definitely a physical plan improvement, considerable, between Chicago and St. Louis, where speeds up as high as 110 mile an hour, and it has operated quite well. It's had some degradation of recent, but those are opportunities that exist throughout the national network, and I think we need to look at them and seize those opportunities and spend our money wisely.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank all of you for being here today, but also for your commitment to public service. I want to start with, I've got a few questions, so I'll try and keep the answers relatively short. I'll start with Ms. Clegg. And you talked a little bit about the importance of long-distance rail in the West and access in Idaho. Obviously, the California Zephyr Amtrak route passes through Colorado, connecting the West Coast to the Midwest. Potentially additional service in Colorado along the Front Range corridor, really probably up into Cheyenne, Wyoming, would provide additional economic opportunities, expand transit options for communities along the entire route. Looking at Idaho, at the Front Range of Colorado and Wyoming, if you're confirmed, is there a way to begin the process of looking at these routes and the expansion of the potential expansion of Amtrak routes?
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Hickenlooper, absolutely there's a way. And I think that it starts with what you helped form in Colorado with the Front Range Commission. Those local groups that bring the local expertise and knowledge of what's happening in their region can band together and put in for corridor identification program applications, such as the Big Sky Rail Authority did in Montana, such as the City of Boise, City of Salt Lake, and cities in between are reapplying for in the Idaho-Utah region. If we get some train on the track, and including from Pueblo to Cheyenne, then there will make so much sense to connect those to the longer distance network. I'm excited that the FRA long distance study has identified the Old Pioneer route, the Desert Wind route, the route from not just Pueblo to Cheyenne, but all the way to Billings as potential expansion, and we'll work toward those.
Great, I appreciate that, and I agree wholeheartedly. Mr. Latham, the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, completed a safety audit of Amtrak in November of 2022, found a strong culture of safety at Amtrak, but there's room for improvement. The report recommended that Amtrak improve its equipment testing, additionally focus on worker safety. If you're confirmed, how could you ensure Amtrak continues to build on safety culture and prioritize the recommendations from the FRA safety audit that still remain outstanding?
Whenever we have a board meeting, make sure we get up-to-date information on where we are with safety. Are we making it a priority? And are we fulfilling the mission in which we have as a board to make sure that safety is a priority?
Great. I couldn't agree more, and appreciate your history of emphasizing worker safety along the way. Mr. Capozzi, in your testimony, you highlighted the importance of ensuring Amtrak's services remain accessible to passengers with differing abilities. The American with Disabilities Act is one of the cornerstones for equity in the United States. And I think recognizing the leadership of Senator Duckworth here in the Senate, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 includes strong protections for airline passengers with disabilities. Mr. Capozzi, if you're confirmed, would you commit to Amtrak and its participation in the Passenger Rail Advisory Committee that it's responsive to the concerns raised by passengers with disabilities?
Absolutely. I mean, that's been my career, and that'll be my focus on the Amtrak board if I'm confirmed.
I appreciate you and all your history of service along this on these issues. Mr. Bertori, I'm very proud. I think I'm going to get all 4 questions in. Amtrak's financial reporting indicates 80% of the losses in fiscal year 2023 were from the long-distance service, or the service corridors. Clearly, though, communities along existing and future long-distance routes, especially in the Mountain West, benefit significantly from reliable passenger rail service. So, Mr. Bertori, what can we learn from Amtrak's history operating long-distance service routes to ensure that we grow the network while maintaining financial sustainability?
Thank you for that question, Senator. There's continuous, if you will, evolution of questions and answers that have to be addressed at any scheduled network. Long-distance trains being a major component of that, and that needs to continue. With that continuation, I am of the belief that long-distance trains are an integral part of tying this country together, as I mentioned earlier, with all the state-supported services, as well as the Northeast Corridor. There's lessons to be learned every day, every year, and from those lessons learned, okay, you want to build upon what we learn and make improvements and not accept status quo as being the norm.
Great. I'd like to put an exclamation point behind that statement.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your service. Madam Chair?
Thank you so much. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing today. Mr. Bertori and Mr. Capozzi, I recently introduced the Amtrak Transparency Act. And this legislation's goal is to improve transparency within Amtrak's Board of Directors and increase opportunities for stakeholder input into Amtrak's decision-making processes. The legislation aims to build public trust and ensure that Amtrak's governance aligns with the highest standards of accountability, particularly given its reliance on taxpayer funding. If confirmed, how will you work to improve increased transparency and accountability by the Amtrak Board?
I'll go first. Thank you for that question. I'm familiar with the legislation, and I understand that compensation and awards are a very complex and personal issue. I also understand the need to retain highly performing employees, but I also understand the need for transparency, and I really support that. And I understand that Amtrak has already provided some information publicly. I'd like to see that actually a little bit more transparent so that it's more discoverable on its website.
I support more transparency.
That would be good. That would be good. We'd appreciate that. You know, earlier this year, Senator Cruz and I, we sent that letter to the chairman questioning how Amtrak gave $75 million in bonus payments despite a $1.75 billion net loss. And Amtrak did announce that it would begin to publicly share the bonuses it awards to executives. Mr. Pretorian and Ms. Clegg, if confirmed, would you commit to increased transparency regarding those bonuses and be able to not just provide the transparency on the amount, but why such bonuses were given and the amounts that they were?
Thank you, Senator Fisher, for that question. Yes, to your questions, executive compensation, incentive compensation is nothing new, but as far as my experience, especially in the private sector, okay, the disclosure is very transparent, not only in the monetary amounts, but the methodology in which it's applied, and I see no reason why Amtrak wouldn't follow such a model.
Thank you. Ms. Clegg?
Thank you, Chairman Cantwell. Senator, I've always served on boards that have open meeting law requirements and have never had any problem with transparency in those situations. Would continue to be open to exploring that for the Amtrak board. As far as the executive compensation, I think, you know, if you look at the system of executive compensation around the country, the fact that Amtrak has it is not the issue. The issue might be, from a board position, if I'm confirmed, what are the incentives? What are the outcomes we're after? How do they compare to the financials of the organization? As a board member, I think it's fine to give executive compensation. It's what private sector does around this country, but making sure that you're doing it in a way that is both responsible and brings the outcomes that you need is the issue as far as I can see.
Have any of the members of the panel who are before us today, have any of you gotten information on what the reason was for that amount being given as bonuses to those individuals? I can't see you, so if you could just go down the row and be able to answer that, please.
Senator, this is Elaine Clegg, and no, I don't, but if I'm confirmed to the Amtrak board, I can assure you that I will know next time.
Thank you.
No, Senator, nothing was disclosed to me preceding this hearing, but should I be confirmed, it would definitely be of my interest, and I think the colleagues of the board, to know not only the monetary amounts, but what constituted those monetary amounts, and does the methodology follow good business practice?
Okay.
Senator, no.
Next.
No, Senator, I haven't had any previous discussion.
Okay, thank you. I know that the Amtrak Board of Directors, they do not conduct open meetings as other federally chartered entities do. And my legislation would expand the board meeting requirements to include representatives from state-sponsored and long-distance routes, as well as rail passenger groups that have a keen interest in Amtrak decisions. I would ask to all nominees, if confirmed, would you commit to working with holders like state DOTs and rail groups so that they can have a seat at the table?
I'll go first. This is David. I think public outreach is one way that Amtrak can improve its standing with all parts of the community, including the disability community. And in fact, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act now requires that Amtrak Board meet at least annually with representatives of Amtrak's employees, representatives of people with disabilities, and the general public to discuss financial performance and service results, and more meetings like that I think would be very helpful.
Including our state DOTs and rail groups?
Absolutely.
Meeting with stakeholders is always important.
Yes, Senator Fisher, I concur with that approach. I think the more communication you have with rail advocacy groups as well as with rail labor, and definitely the state DOTs would be beneficial to the overall network of Amtrak.
Senator, I've always worked collaboratively. That's the way that I've learned I can get things done. Over the last 3 years, I've worked closely with many of those advocacy groups. I know them well. I would continue to communicate with them. I believe it's in Amtrak's best interest to create good relationships and good communication with all groups, including state DOTs and local commissions, as well as the advocacy groups.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Markey, are you ready to go? Okay. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome. The bipartisan infrastructure law ushered in an historic era of investment for passenger rail in the United States. This funding is already at work building new rail corridors, expanding rail service. It's really doing a great job, and the President deserves all of the credit in the world for helping to lead us, and we thank you, Madam Chair, for all of your work as well. So for each of the nominees, please answer yes or no. Do you agree that in order for passenger rail to succeed in this country, it needs reliable, sustainable funding, building on the investments of the bipartisan infrastructure law?
I'll start, and yes, but I also want...
Yes or no? Yep. Mr.
I also want to congratulate you on all of your years of service on behalf of people with disabilities and for your commitment to accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we'll allow that. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Gross.
Yes.
Mr. Latham. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, probably the most important thing.
The most important thing. So, Mr. Batory, do you agree, yes or no, that the #1 priority for Amtrak must be safety?
Unequivocally, yes.
When it comes to trains, safety must be our top priority. There's no better way to ensure the safety of both passengers and the communities nearby railroad tracks than to have a well-resourced, experienced rail workforce. This committee has heard over and over again that having multiple crew members on the train in East Palestine increase safety and help prevent the disaster from being even worse. And the Federal Railroad Administration's objective research on this issue is even clearer. When the FRA has, while the FRA has found that technology can make our trains safer, it also found that technology is no replacement for having multiple crew members on each freight train. And despite these safety benefits, when you led the Federal Railroad Administration, you roll back the requirement that freight trains have 2-person crews. So, Mr. Batory, yes or no, do you believe that it is safe to allow one person to operate a 2-mile-long train?
Senator, I'll just answer it this way. I have no yes or no answer because I do not believe that there's a uniform crew size that fits the entire network of the United States of America. I will say, though, that we do have a very effective tool from Congress called the Railway Labor Act. It's 98 years old, and I used it all 46 years of my railroad career successfully, and that was seeing rail labor and railroads negotiate working conditions, benefits, as well as compensation. And that's where it belongs.
Well,
And
Mr. Vittori,
that's how we achieved what we achieved today in the way of crew size, from 5 and 6 people down to 2 and 3 today.
well, I think
And
you
the
you
people
can,
closest
you
to
can
the
talk
railroad
about collective
industry
bargaining, but then
are
our
those
committee's
that you can
responsible for
negotiate.
making sure that there's safety, you know, that we put safety number one. You already agreed on that.
I will
So-
never compromise safety.
Well, you were the top rail safety regulator at the time. I need to know whether you thought allowing fewer people to operate long, dangerous trains made the system safer. So let's review, Mr. Vittori, what the research from FRA actually says. Multiple reports over the past decade found that technology simply cannot replace the safety benefits of having a multi-person crew aboard a train. Those reports found that the technology that the railroads say can replace certified conductors does not check alertness or fatigue of the engineer, does not assist with physically demanding tasks like securing a train with hand brakes during an emergency, and does not assist the engineer when complying with restricted speed zones and avoiding on-track collisions. In fact, operating the technology can actually distract an engineer from what is happening outside of the train. From Quebec to North Dakota, we've seen over and over how expert teams of crew members can save lives. And that's why I'm so proud to say that my provision to require 2-person crews on freight trains was included in the Railway Safety Act. We thank you, Madam Chair. And I will always work to ensure safety is our top rail priority, whether those trains carry freight or passengers. I think it's imperative for us, and it's actually why I was working with Senator Vance on including that language in the bill. That's about as bipartisan on this committee as you're ever going to get. So I just
Thank you,
think it's
Senator
imperative that we move forward, and I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Thank you for that important leadership. Senator Moran.
Chair Cantwell, thank you. I welcome our nominees and thank you for your willingness to serve. We've had a conversation with about every nominee that has been in front of this committee since I've been on it, which is now years, in regard to long distance passenger rail service. And several of you are returnees who've answered my question before, so I will ask for you to recommit to long distance passenger service. And I will ask the 2 others to tell me what their views are on the importance of that long distance passenger rail service. I am pleased that we have a diversity resolved panel in front of us. Diversity meaning geographic, and the president has made nominations that are now in compliance with the law that require there be a broader spectrum than just members of this Amtrak board that live in the Northeast Corridor. So, Mr. Capozzi, when you testified before the committee in 2022, you shared, I'm quoting you, "I support your commitment," speaking of mine, "to the long-distance train service and that is accessible to everybody." Is that still true, and anything you'd want to add to that to further make sure I don't put a hold on your nomination?
That's still true, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same for Mr. Latham. You answered in response to that, committed. Anything you want to expand that, or any reason that I should have any doubt about your commitment?
No, Senator.
And so that leaves me with the 2 additional nominees. Mr. Badatory and Ms. Clegg, tell me what your commitment is to long-distance passenger rail service. And tell me, in Kansas, to us, that generally means the Southwest Chief, and in the future, potentially the Heartland Flyer. What should I know about your work on the board that would assure me that that long-distance passenger service is a priority for you? Ms. Clegg?
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Moran, I have been working for the last 3 years to expand the long-distance system. Absolutely, the Northeast Corridor is important to Amtrak, but without the connecting long-distance system, it doesn't serve all of the Americans in the United States. And this is an American system, not a Northeast system. As to the Southwest Chief and the others in the Southwest, absolutely committed to improving service to them, but also to adding service by adding new connecting routes that will make that service more useful to the residents of the Southwest.
That's exactly the circumstance we have in Kansas. Thank you. Mr. Badatory.
Yes, Senator, proponent of long-distance service. A particular example that associated with your state was Southwest Chief, and we worked very hard with Amtrak to ensure that positive train control would be implemented, so ensure that the Southwest Chief would not be bifurcated, if you will, and continue its operation. And I think that the national network and all 15 long-distance trains, okay, naturally require review, not unlike all the state-supported trains and those on the Northeast Corridor. Nothing ever stays the same. It requires continuous review. But it does create a network for this country, and every effort should be made to maintain that network. And long-distance trains play a vital role.
I'm going to take the four of you statements as satisfactory by my standard and look forward to your confirmation on the Senate floor. This issue arose for me, just for a moment of history, when the 6 senators, 2 from New Mexico, 2 from Colorado, and 2 from Kansas, met with a former CEO of Amtrak, in which, in an offhand statement, indicated that the plan was to put bus service between Garden City and Tucumcari. It caught me by surprise, and it absolutely made no sense to me that anybody is going to get on the Southwest Chief in Chicago and go to Garden City, Kansas, and get off and get on a bus. And so this attitude or approach to just, in my view, dismissing Southwest Chief and particularly long-distance service in such a cavalier manner, when there are problems and we're working to provide resources, that means dollars, to the railroads and to Amtrak to improve that track, but it doesn't mean such a dramatic and actually non-real solution to whatever problem existed at the time. And I'm committed myself to trying to make certain that that kind of cavalier approach would not be supported by any member of the Amtrak board. So thank you for what you had to say, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to each of our nominees. Congratulations on your nomination and your willingness to serve in this important role. I chair the Surface Transportation Subcommittee of this full committee, and in July I convened a field hearing in Lansing, Michigan, to discuss investments made by the bipartisan infrastructure law, including passenger rail, which was a significant part. I believe it's a really exciting time in Michigan right now for train travel, and specifically we received a corridor ID grant to explore increasing intercity passenger rail along every major route in our state, and potentially, and this is very exciting, expanding the Wolverine line into Windsor, Canada. This would mean returning passenger rail to the historic and recently renovated, beautifully renovated, Michigan Central Station in downtown Detroit. So my first question is for you, Mr. Badatory. I know you're a Michigan native as well, and that's a great credential to have. Mr. Badatory, I'm a huge advocate for passenger rail in Michigan, which is why I'm working right now to secure $2 million to fund the development of a new intermodal bus and passenger rail facility at that Michigan Central Station, as well as a new station in Ann Arbor. This summer, Michigan Central Station reopened its doors for the first time since 1967, and this new state-of-the-art complex not only includes a rehabilitated transit station, but also research and development facilities where the future of urban transit is being designed as well as being tested. Now that we're beginning to see the early success of this rehabilitation project, I think it's critical that we work to restore Amtrak's presence at the Central Michigan Central Station and make service between Detroit and Windsor, Canada, a reality. So my question for you is, if confirmed, will you support efforts to reestablish service to Michigan Central Station and expand Amtrak service routes throughout Michigan?
Yes, Senator, I would, and I think there's an opportunity for us to provide a service that's better than what it was once known to be.
Good. Well, if confirmed, I will look forward to working closely with you to make that happen. Ms. Clegg, expanding rail service to places like Michigan can and should include international rail travel, which is why I'm so excited about this Windsor opportunity. And as Chair of Homeland Security and Government Affairs, I'm committed to working with all of the agencies involved to make sure that we can do that in a timely manner as we cross international borders will require that kind of coordination. So given your work, Ms. Clegg, in the Mountain West and in the Pacific Northwest, can you discuss the feasibility of coordinating rail travel across our northern border? And do you think progress has been made on models that will allow that to actually happen?
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Peters, absolutely. In Chairman Cantwell's state of Washington, the state and the states of Oregon and the province of British Columbia are working hard to extend service regularly from Portland all the way to Vancouver. As part of that, they're working on a system where that cross-border customs work will be done very quickly, very seamlessly as part of the trip and not take more time. So I think there's examples of that happening. I think for our train system to be effective across North America, I think we need to expand those examples, and I'm really happy to hear that Windsor is in the mix here.
Yeah, definitely is, and what's so exciting about that route, I just see this amazing corridor, because we have the train now from Detroit to Chicago. So from Chicago to Detroit to Windsor and then Toronto, I mean, that would be an amazing economic corridor to develop. And if you've got two major financial centers like Chicago and Toronto connected together and coming through Detroit, it'll be a powerful driver, kind of like the corridor we see here on the East Coast. Three major cities all connected with high-speed rail ultimately would be amazing. So my last question is for both you, Ms. Clegg, and Mr. Capozzi. I serve on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I'm supporting an increase in Amtrak funding for the next fiscal year. And I believe this money will allow Amtrak to sustain operations, maintain a state of good repair, and safely get passengers to their destination. So quickly, if both of you could discuss the importance of adequate funding in the remaining time, which is limited.
Senator Peters, adequate funding is vital for Amtrak to continue to provide good service, not just adequate, but stable, being able to count on it, not being an annual appropriation.
Great. Capozzi?
I would agree with that, and especially in terms of accessibility. So Amtrak, as I said in my testimony, has about a third of its stations that fully meet the accessibility requirements under the ADA. And in order to get that to 100%, which the goal publicly stated by Amtrak is 2029, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of commitment to make that happen. So absolutely, full funding is absolutely critical.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. I don't see any of our colleagues on the other side. I know Senator Blackburn was on the screen, but I don't see her now, so I'm going to turn to Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And congratulations to all of you. Amtrak is incredibly important to us in Vermont, as it is to citizens all across the country. But I really appreciate your service, and it's very, very, very important. A couple of questions that I have. One is, we've had a lot of flooding in Vermont in the last couple of years, and it's done a lot of damage to our tracks. There's been a number of delays in getting them repaired. It obviously has a huge impact on commerce and on travel. And it raises the question that is being asked around the country about these weather events that are more frequent and more extreme. So I'll ask a question, but all of you can think about it, to Ms. Clegg. What kind of steps will Amtrak be taking to adjust, frankly, to the extreme weather events that are certainly occurring often in Vermont and I know in many other parts of the country?
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Welch, you know, I don't have a lot of expertise in that particular issue. I will commit to you that when I'm confirmed to the Amtrak board, I will dig in and find an answer and work on it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not ever satisfied with just letting things be as they are. And this is certainly something that we need to work on.
No, I appreciate that. And I just would ask all of you, obviously safety is a major concern for you, and the weather events are going to affect safety. But it really does, I think, raise different kinds of questions about resiliency and how you do repair in a way that hopefully will get us through the next storm. A second issue that's really important for us in Vermont is the capacity of parents with young children, babies, to change their babies. I mean, this is really, really important in order to have train travel be practical. 28 million passenger trips in 48 states. The average duration of a trip on Amtrak most traveled route, the Northeast Regional, lasts about 3.5 to 8 hours, and most babies need to be changed every 2 hours. As you probably remember in the old days, for many of you. With Senator Blackburn, she and I have introduced the Baby Changing on Board Act, a bipartisan bill that would require all trains owned and operated by Amtrak to have a baby changing station in every accessible restroom marked with clear signage. I'll just ask each of you, would you each be doing all that you can? There's practical challenges to the implementation that would be the responsibility of Amtrak to adjust to. But that commitment to having that opportunity, a baby changing station for folks who are on these long rides that last longer than their baby can hold out.
So, this is David,
Yeah.
if I can go first. So I'm familiar with the legislation and understand the need for it as being a father of triplets. So I know how often kids have to get changed. The one thing that I would underscore, and I think there's a need for perhaps technical assistance in this area, is when I was at the Access Board, providing baby changing tables in accessible restrooms often became problematic if they weren't installed properly because they would intrude on the clear floor space. So,
No, I understand.
so I think that's an important consideration as well.
There's practical problems, but what I'm hearing from you is you realize it's a practical problem for parents to travel. I'm not going to go down the line because I'm hoping that everyone would be as supportive as possible to deal with the practical challenges. I do want to, Mr. Vittori, I want to ask you about pre-clearance. We have a great train that we want to, it goes to Montreal. Pre-clearance will make a huge difference and for the ease of travel so you don't have those long lockups at the border. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act required Amtrak in cooperation with the Department of Transportation and other federal and Canadian entities to issue a report with recommendations on how to improve cross-border train service. This is really huge for us in Vermont. And if confirmed, Mr. Vittori, will you commit to working with me and my colleagues to establish a pre-clearance facility? We need a facility and expedite travel between Vermont and Canada.
Senator, being a victim, if you will, on rail travel at cross-border as far as delays, yes, you have my full commitment.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much. Not seeing any of our other colleagues on the other side, I turn to Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for this hearing. And everything's been said, but I haven't said it. That's our line in the Senate. And so I had some other things, but I'm glad to be here with all of you. Big fan of train travel and Amtrak. As I always say, it's one way my husband and I can take a vacation and not get into an argument about directions, which I like. And have been a big believer from the day that we first went to Milwaukee. My mom, that's where her parents were from. And so we would always take the train. It was then the Milwaukee Road to Wisconsin twice a year. And I knew every town along the route and got to meet the conductor and everything else. So aside from those romantic memories and the like, I think that so much of the argument we can make now is also an economic argument. And I guess I would start with you, Ms. Clegg. The Empire Builder route is one of Amtrak's longest rail lines from Chicago to the West Coast, provides a vital link for many rural towns in Minnesota. The rail line contributes approximately $327 million to the economies of the states in which it operates. And Ms. Clegg, you noted that the Empire Builder is the only passenger service to your home state of Idaho with just one remote stop. Can you speak to the economic importance of long-distance routes for rural and frontier communities? Of course, we're very excited that we've now added another route from Minneapolis, from St. Paul, actually, to Chicago. And the numbers seem really good so far. But Ms. Clegg, if you could answer, thanks.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, Senator Klobuchar. Long-distance service is incredibly important to the economic vitality of the West. In addition to the things that you noted on the Empire Builder that are economically important to Minnesota, I'd note that that route also serves a national park in North Dakota that otherwise wouldn't have many visitors. It also serves Glacier National Park in northern Montana, as well as the town of Whitefish. The town of Sandpine, although it only arrives in the middle of the night, is in the area in northern Idaho that is much visited by a lot of tourists, resort area. And so just that alone creates economic vitality. The other thing that's important about that route that I think is instructive for how new routes in the West could work is that it also serves as a commuter route, long-distance commuter route for many of the small communities along that route. People who live in a remote area can still work in a place that is far away because of that train. So absolutely important.
It's one of the reasons I've been advocating for this route. There's track already there between the Twin Cities and Duluth, and actually was a priority of DOT, and I've talked to Secretary Buttigieg about it, called the Northern Lights Express, nice name. And it would be a very, very good thing and a good deal. So we're still trying to get this done.
And congratulations on the success of the Borealis. It's been great.
Yes, thank you for knowing the name of it. Another interesting light concept. I guess I'd go to you, Mr. Capozzi, on that. As noted, Amtrak launched the new Borealis route. It's the first time in 45 years that there's been twice daily trains from St. Paul to Chicago. Stops in Winona, Red Wing, stops in Wisconsin. As I noted, the ridership has exceeded expectations by as much as 27%, with over 47,000 riders from May to July. If confirmed, will you commit to work to improve and maintain passenger rail on these types of routes?
Yes, absolutely. As we talked before, I support long-distance travel or long-distance routes, state-supported routes, the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak is a national network, absolutely.
Good. Anyone who want to add anything?
Senator Klobuchar, let me just say, you were one of my sheroes until Vice President Kamala came, but you still
Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely, I would support.
All right, very good. Mr. Battery?
Yes, Senator, the 100% increase in frequency with the new service between Chicago and Minneapolis, I think is a good news story. Time and distance breeds variability. The Seattle-Chicago train actually has delay, but with that shorter distance route between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago, I think you're going to see better regular service, in that corridor, and it will grow.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I know that Amtrak experienced its best operational performance ever in 2018, but they're still on time. I've had good fortune in the corridor, when I go to visit friends or the like. I was just in New York, and it goes well. I like it, and it's on time, but there have always been those issues, and I just talk about maybe you, Mr. Capozzi, what you think we need to do to improve on time.
I mean, part of the issue obviously is outside the Northeast corridor, we're reliant on other rail providers. And so that's an ongoing issue. And that's going to take conversation, commitment, and discussions with other providers to ensure that they meet their obligations of providing priority to Amtrak. And if it was an easy issue, it would have been solved a long time ago, I think.
Yeah, well, and some workforce issues is issue for every transportation industry that comes before this committee, and we're very focused on trying to get more people into these careers, so.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, well, thank you. I have an apartment here that I hear the Amtrak trains when they come in, and it's very, very fun, honestly. That's why I picked it. Just keep up the good work, and let's keep expanding, especially in the middle of the country. I just think there's so many opportunities that are untapped. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Blackburn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And to each of you, thank you for being here. And Senator Klobuchar is, pardon me, concerned about rail access in the middle of the country. I want to talk about that potential passenger rail route from Atlanta, Chattanooga, Nashville, Memphis. And I would like to hear a verbal response from each of you that if confirmed, you would continue to work on a self-sustaining and efficient railway for passengers in these communities. Start at one end of the dais and work down.
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Blackburn, yes, I will.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Blackburn.
Yes.
Ditto. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Capozzi, I know that Senator Welch asked you about our Baby Changing on Board Act. And knowing that you have worked with Americans with disabilities, I would like to know that you're going to support this legislation, because some of these train routes take a while, like Memphis to New Orleans can take over 9 hours. And of course, babies have to be changed regularly. So is this the type of legislation that you're willing to support?
Thank you for the question, Senator Blackburn. Yes, and as I said earlier, I understand certainly the need for accessible baby changing tables. As the father of triplets, our kids are now much older, but I still remember those days fondly. The point that I made to Senator Welch was that it's important to ensure that accessibility isn't compromised, because space is at a premium in the accessible bathroom. So I think technical assistance will be critical to ensure that they're installed properly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Latham, I want to come to you. I know that Senator Schmidt asked you about your trips to Venezuela in 2009, 2011. Have you made any additional trips into Venezuela?
No.
No, okay. And I know that you have been quoted in articles as calling Chavez a nice guy and very benevolent, and you said or indicated you did not remember making those statements. Do you have any clarification on that?
No.
You don't? Okay, we will get you those statements so that you can provide in writing an appropriate response. Mr. Chavez arrested dissidents and said that he was a self-avowed enemy of the United States. Are you aware of that? And do you agree with his statement?
No.
You do not, okay. Mr. Chavez nationalized and effectively decimated the entire transportation system in Venezuela. So do you share Mr. Chavez's views toward transportation that government bureaucrats should exert more control over the industry?
No.
Okay. Let me ask you about your previous involvement with the Delaware River and Bay Authority, which was rife with corruption and scandal during your service. After the agency spent more than $1 million on trips and entertainment over a 3-year period, the board adopted policies to bring some fiscal responsibility to the organization. You reportedly claimed and complained about the charges, and you were upset that you would, and I'm going to quote you, that you would have to fly coach overseas, end quote. At Amtrak, as budgetary losses piled up in 2022, executives earned over $2 million in bonuses. And Senator Fisher brought this up with you all. And I would like to know, Mr. Latham, given your past comments on using taxpayer funds to have a life of luxury, how can we trust you to bring fiscal responsibility and transparency to Amtrak?
I've never taken any trips with the DRBA, and I've never justified what happened while I was on the board when I began. As a matter of fact, the reason the governor appointed me to the board was to correct some of those violations that were going on. And we were able to do that. We changed policy. We put in a...
So why did you complain about the changes?
I don't remember complaining about the changes. Matter of fact, I was part of help making the changes.
We'll submit that reporting to you so you can respond in writing. I would like to have some clarity on that. We're very concerned about the losses at Amtrak, so we will do that. Let me ask you this. Do you have experience in the rail industry in your background?
In the rail industry? No.
Yes, sir.
No.
You have no experience.
Not in the rail industry, no.
Is there anyone else on the panel that has no rail experience in their background?
I have transportation experience.
Any other member of the panel? Is any other member lacking rail experience? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Moran, did you have a second round that you were interested in? Ah, what a diligent member. Diligent member. Okay. Well, I would like to ask another round quickly, and if there's anybody else, members who are thinking about attending, now would be a great time to do so. Otherwise, we will wrap this up quickly. But one of the things I wanted to do, Ms. Clegg, obviously we're excited about a Western member that could understand some of the dynamics. Obviously, I already asked about working with the communities and the states in a more robust and transparent way, particularly on the on-time service. But you mentioned in your statement about Boise and about some of the added capacity that we could see in the Pacific Northwest. What do you think those best options are?
Senator Cantwell, could you repeat the last part of that?
What do you think some of the best options are for increasing that capacity? When I think about how trains split off in Spokane and go down to the Tri-Cities, or how we might reestablish Yakima, or maybe even in, the Montana corridor, come down through Billings, Boise, Billings, and
Thank you for
Bozeman,
clarifying
all the
that.
way to Boise.
I think there are a lot of opportunities in the Northwest. Right now, we have only the train up the coast, the Cascadia, and then, of course, the Empire Builder that goes over the mountains and across the north. And there are already tracks that travel through Yakima to Pendleton. Probably the Columbia River crossing would be the challenge with that one. There's already tracks on both sides of the Columbia down to Pendleton and then down through the Cascades into Boise, into Pocatello, Salt Lake, and then points east. At Pocatello, there's a track that still exists that connects to Butte, Montana. Senator Hickenlooper talked about the track that exists from Cheyenne to Billings. Ultimately, we could have quite a connected system in the Northwest. I think it will require that the state-supported routes really become more supported by those western states, that the corridor identification program be used to identify which of those corridors will be most likely to succeed and how we can help them succeed, but really look forward to a robust, connected system in a place where we desperately need it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Vittori, I wanted to return a follow-up to Senator Markey's question about your time at FRA and the Trump administration on the FRA issues on safety. During the time you were working in the rail industry, would you have ever had a 2-mile long train operating across the country with only one crew member?
Senator, not knowing the specifics, it's doubtful that I would. Okay. There's no such word as can't, but as far as generically saying, would I run a train across the country 2 miles long with one crew member? Probably not. Because there's portions of the rail network that are complicated. There's topography. There's demand issues. So there's a lot of variables that come into play. And that's why I've always said, let the people closest to the work decide what needs to be done.
And what about LNG? Because I think under your leadership at the FRA, you worked in coordination with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Administration to allow the transport of liquefied natural gas by rail across the country. Obviously, it's much more dangerous. Do you still believe that LNG should be permitted to ship on a 2-mile long train?
Regardless of the length of train, the vessel itself, the tank, okay, resided within the pipeline agency, okay? The only thing we looked at was the vehicle that carries the vessel. And we had no difficulty with the vehicle, the flat car, that carries the vessel on top. So I can't answer your question insofar as the details associated with the vessel.
Even though NTSB had safety concerns?
I would respect those concerns. They need to be investigated and answered accordingly in a non-biased.
So you will commit to taking a look at those, the NTSB recommendations?
If it were,
as an Amtrak board member, you will look at those recommendations?
If it were to percolate, okay, to the Amtrak board, okay, and if I was confirmed, I would certainly, we could take a renewed interest in it.
I think, okay, this is a really important question, so I want you to think about this for a minute. One of the things that I think our committee as a group has worked very hard on is to make sure that the FAA listens to the NTSB. The major legislation that Senator Wicker and I worked on established early reporting that the NTSB would do on an annual basis. What are the safety trends? Why? Because we didn't think the FAA was paying enough attention to them. So we certainly want the NTSB to be paid attention to. And so I'm just asking your commitment to take their recommendations seriously.
I have always taken NTSB recommendations serious and will continue to.
Okay.
Regardless of the subject matter.
Okay. Let's see here. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the efficiency of the service. As we continue to look at the challenges as we were just discussing, Ms. Clegg, and maybe anybody, really, the rest of the nominees, this establishing of service and efficiencies. And from the West, you get a different mode, obviously, because you are empowering communities. You know, I would say, you know, access to some of our national parks being one of the key components of that. Being in Glacier and seeing everybody get off the train, I mean, that's why they're there, to go see that park. And they were so benefited that they got to ride on Amtrak to get there. How are you all thinking about these expansion services, or even the I-10 corridor, which is another example in another part of the country? How are you guys looking at the economics of these decisions on expansion of service?
Senator Cantwell, I'll take the first shot at that. I think if you followed the FRA long-distance study, you probably do know this, that one of the criteria that they looked at was national parks. Another was educational institutions. Another was disadvantaged communities along the route. I think there were 15 or 20 different criteria. I think if we look at that study and look at what they learned about some of those routes, we can use that to ensure that the routes that we build are the correct ones and that we do it well. In terms of trying to figure out how to provide the best service, I would say that the places that do have local commissions and local groups already are the ones that are working hard to provide that better service because of that local expertise on the ground, and would hope that Amtrak could not just work with those groups, but help spur the formation of some of those groups, because I think it will help Amtrak's service in the long run if we can.
Okay, any comments by other witnesses about how to expand this service and look at the economics of the issues?
Senator, I just think that within Amtrak, there's a host of subject matter experts associated with scheduling of trains that they're operating today, as well as trains that should operate tomorrow. And we should endorse and foster that type of work. And by doing that, we will continue to build upon the national network that we know of today. And the national network we know of today is not necessarily the perfect or the exact network that we need for the future, but it's an evolution, and the board needs to support the Amtrak management team to develop and continue to maintain that development of a national network that patronizes the people of this country.
I was asking a little bit more, as Ms. Clegg mentioned, on those criteria that are included in a list, as opposed to just the operations, people looking at the operation time. I think the Northeast Corridor is unique, but so is the West. And I would say so is the South. And there are big regional priorities within those areas. And so I was really looking to see the nominees' thoughts about how important expansion of Amtrak is. To me, I think it's an important tool. Some of those criteria are there and in place. And part of it is figuring out what else we need to do to make sure that we communicate about the viability of these services to an entire region. And I'm not sure that we have the full scope of that. Again, because I think if we did, we might have that I-10 corridor development already there.
Senator, I would like to see more expansion into rural areas. Being a small state, we still have a problem with transportation in the rural areas. And I think there's a lot more states like us that could use more rail service in those rural areas.
And Senator, the expansion of rail breeds economic development in the communities that rail serves. And that's why I think it's so important to continually look at that network and say, what can we do? Because it's not just about making money or how much money we lose on a train, it's what it does to the communities it serves and the people that live in those communities. And I share the same feeling about rural America.
Thank you. Mr. Capozzi, before I turn to my colleague. Okay, Senator Lujan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for holding this hearing, and thank you to each of you for being here as well. Every time Amtrak nominees have come before this committee, I've pushed for robust funding and support for Amtrak to improve rail network for long-distance runs. I continue to hear horror stories about delays and challenges, especially from constituents in New Mexico. There's been folks that have been trying to cut the run there and give us buses instead of trying to fight to keep that thing going and you extrapolate that across rural America. So I appreciate the responses I've already been hearing. The Southwest Chief has the second lowest on-time performance rate of all the long-distance routes, getting customers on their destination on time only 34% of the time during this last year. I would like to commend President Biden for nominating several Amtrak board members from the Western United States in line with the requirements passed in the bipartisan infrastructure law for geographical diversity on the board. Now, it's vital that there are members of the board who understand the unique challenges of the West and will stand up for our long-distance routes and the passengers they serve. Mr. Batory, I appreciate you being here as well, being from Santa Fe. Now, I'd like to pose the same question to all of you. As a member of the Amtrak board, yes or no, are you committed to advocating for increased funding for the long-distance network, in particular to address outdated equipment and maintenance issues?
Yes.
Mr. Capote? Yes, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vittori? Ms. Latham?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you or Ms. Clegg, thank you. I'll follow up in writing about that as well. Now, I want to follow up more specifically on my efforts to preserve the Southwest Chief service in New Mexico and very much appreciate the work of Senator Moran. It was years ago as a member of the House when I was invited into a room with several senators, with Senator Moran leading that effort to visit with a CEO from Amtrak when they were trying to give us buses and trying to cut those trains to get commitments there. So, Mr. Batory, you served as administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration during the previous administration. While FRA and Amtrak are separate, they do work closely, especially when it comes to grant making and budgetary decisions. Can you briefly explain your involvement in the repeated attempts to move the Southwest Chief route to bus service during your time as FRA administrator?
Senator Moran, I'm proud to share with you that there was a gulf between myself and President Anderson in regards to the Southwest Chief. I took a personal interest in it. First, we were using the absence of positive train control as the reason. Then we were talking about the physical plant condition. I reached out to Burlington Northern Santa Fe. I high-railed the railroad from Lamy, New Mexico, going to Trinidad, and realized that the physical plant was adequate for the class of track in which it was maintained for, and that there was a lot of subterfuge, if you will, on trying to degrade the Southwest Chief. I'm pleased to share with you it never happened.
I very much appreciate that and was hoping to hear that as clear as you shared it today so that it was part of the record. Now, Ms. Pretori, I'm going to read a quote from the president, previous president, President Trump's fiscal year 2018 budget request. Quote, Amtrak's long-distance trains do not serve a vital transportation purpose and are a vestige of when train service was the only viable transcontinental transportation option, end quote. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't recall that statement, but I don't agree with it.
That answers my question. Mr. Vittori, do you agree that Congress should stop funding Amtrak's long-distance routes?
No, it should not.
If confirmed, do you commit to preserving and expanding rather than reducing service on the Southwest Chief line?
I would certainly be open to listening to the facts that support that expansion.
I appreciate that very much. Madam Chair, I want to thank you for this important hearing and especially allowing me to ask questions around the Southwest Chief, which is vital to New Mexico. Since I have 30 seconds, Mr. Batory, being from Santa Fe, I hope that we look to expand opportunities and we take a chance to learn more, as we heard from Mr. Latham, into more rural areas. There's not a way for us to get from Santa Fe down to Las Cruces, into the border and into Santa Teresa, which is expanding. It's incredible to see what's happening there and gets us closer to El Paso. So I hope to have further conversations with all of you down the road as we look at some of those opportunities down the road. So thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Thank you for that advocacy. Before we close the hearing, I have one more question for the nominees. If confirmed, will you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee, provide thorough and timely responses to your requests for information as we put together and address important policy issues, and appear before the committee when requested?
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I look forward to it. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for your willingness and commitment to serve. That ends our hearing. You'll have until the close of business Monday, September 16th, to submit, senators will, to submit questions for the record, and witnesses will have until the close of business Monday, September 23rd, to respond to those questions. Again, thank you all for being here. This concludes our hearing.